And number 1, Space Invaders. I'm older, and I was 12 years old in 1978. And back at that time, arcades were not really a place that kids hanged out in. It wasn't until Pac-Man came out, and then a lot of the games that followed, that brought kids into the arcades. They were generally very dark, filled with smoke, loud, and the clientele was teenaged and adults. I was fascinated with video games from the beginning. I still play them today. Something about being able to control what happens on the television. I've always found that so fascinating. If you know much about the history of video games, Space Invaders came out in 1978, and of course it was a huge hit, the biggest video game of all time at that point. I didn't get it immediately for my Atari 2600 though. I knew that the arcades had it. My mom really didn't like me going to the arcades because of the atmosphere. So whenever I went to sneak out of the house or tell her I was going over to a friend's house, I had saved up some quarters over the course of a couple months just because I wanted to play Space Invaders. And when the day came for me to actually play, I was pretty excited. I told my mom I was going to the park. I put the quarters in my pocket, and I headed out to the arcade. Now, as I entered the arcade, I wasn't the only younger kid in there. It was really crowded, and mostly everyone was in their older teens. There were also some older guys, but there were 1 or 2 people around my age. But it was very, very crowded, and very dark and smoky. Back then, there weren't any laws really keeping people from smoking inside. I found the Space Invaders game and was surprised it was in the back of the arcade. It had only been out for a couple of months and I knew it had to be popular. However, just one guy was playing it. I put my quarter on the game to reserve my space as the next player. Now, it doesn't reserve the next game, however, just to let you know. The guy playing the game was probably around 17 years old. He was wearing a denim jacket and had long hair. He was kind of a burnout, I guess. He really didn't acknowledge me when I placed my quarter on the machine. He was too deep into the game. When the guy finally lost all of his lives, I expected him to either insert another one of his quarters or walk away. Instead, he reached over, grabbed my reserving quarter, put it in the machine and began playing. I was surprised. It was a clear violation of arcade etiquette. And at first I stood there, just unsure of what to do. He was a big 17-year-old, I was just a smaller 12-year-old kid, so I really didn't want to approach him. So yeah, I just stood there for a few moments. Finally, I did decide to approach the guy. I tapped him on the side and said, "Excuse me, you just took my quarter." He didn't acknowledge me. He just killed a couple aliens and was quiet. I pulled on his jacket a little to get his attention. "Excuse me," I began again, and he swatted at me to knock me away. I came close to him and pulled his arm, which came off the joystick. His character was hit and died. The guy turned to me. I came close to him and pulled his arm, which came off the joystick. His character was hit and died. The guy turned to me and pushed me a little. "What the hell's wrong with you, kid?" He sneered at me. "You just got me killed." "It was my quarter," I shot back. He looked at me and suddenly smiled. "You want to play?" he asked. "Then play." He backed away from the game. I went up to the game to play. I entered a quarter and began shooting aliens. I was elated that I was finally getting to play the game. And then, I felt something. It was sharp, and it was against my back. My attention left the game. "I'll make you a deal, you little shit," the man said in my ear. "You clear the board without losing, and I'll leave. You die once. I'll sever your spinal cord, and you'll never walk again, and you'll never get a boner ever again." It was torture playing that game. The guy was really close behind me, his body pushing me forward a bit, and the point of that blade in my back. Every time, I almost got hit and killed in the game. I expected to get hit and killed in real life. With a knife at my back, I played the game. I kept waiting to lose my life and then to die. Every shot I took, every shot that came at me terrified me beyond belief. Remember, I had never played this game before. I'd only watched others do it. I didn't know what to do. I just played and played. When the spaceship got down and destroyed my barriers, I almost felt the knife going through me. But I did it and I beat the board. For a moment I still felt the knife in my back, but then it was removed. "Beat it, you little shit," the man told me. And I did. Number 2. Obsession. Some people get way too obsessed with their video games. It was sort of like that back in the day. I owned an arcade during the golden age of video games. I was fortunate to keep my arcade open during and after the video game crash. When I first got into it, I honestly wasn't doing it for the money. I loved arcades, and I wanted to have one of my own. And back then, you'd be surprised at the amount of money you could make from a game. When I first opened the arcade, I was really in heaven. I bought a lot of games, and most of them I enjoyed playing myself. And you know how an arcade works? It pretty much runs itself. I don't have to walk around and help customers and such. I could play the games, even when the arcade was open. And of course, I had to use quarters, but hey, the quarters went back to me anyway. Sometimes when a game came out, people get a little too worked up about them though. The games I can remember most were Gauntlet and Double Dragon. Hell, when Gauntlet came out, I felt the video game crash being completely over, as I had people lined up out the door waiting to play it. I tried to get another machine, but I wasn't able to. Anyway, that's enough background. This is about a kid about 17 years old, who was obsessed with a game at my arcade. And I mean really obsessed. But it wasn't something you would think he would be obsessed about. This was in 1986. The kid was obsessed with elevator action. I mean, a lot of people were obsessed with elevator action, but not as much in 1986 as they were years before in 1983. And for about 2 weeks, the team would come in with much more money than I thought he should have, and play elevator action for the time he came in, and he was often there when we closed. Hell, I wasn't going to complain. The game was 3 years old and wasn't played much. It was more money for me. But even so, the kid was sort of weird too, and when I would walk around the arcade, ask people how they were doing, most would take a few seconds to let me know they were having a good time, and would let me know there were no problems. He wouldn't even acknowledge me. The only time he did, he just gave me a look. His eyes were empty though. I don't know how to explain it better than that. It's like I didn't even see a person in there. And that scared the shit out of me, and after that I left him alone. I really didn't have any problems with him though, until this pattern had continued for about 5 weeks. And one day at closing time, people left and I told most of them I hoped I would see them again. Everyone went out the door and I locked up. I went to grab the broom to sweep up before I went to empty the money from the machines. It was then that I noticed something. Someone was playing a game at the back of the store. I knew the sound of the game really well and could tell it was not just the game demo. Someone was playing and I had a pretty good idea who it was. As I walked to the back of the store, I felt my nerves grow as I noticed it was that teenager. He was playing elevator action. I decided to let him know that the arcade was closed. I figured he was into the game that he maybe hadn't heard. I walked up and told the guy the arcade was closed. He didn't acknowledge me at all, so I told him again. I said I'm sorry if he hadn't heard the announcement, but the door was locked and he had to leave. He didn't acknowledge me again. He just kept playing elevator action. At the point, I knew I had to do anything to get his attention, so I reached out and tapped the guy on the shoulder. "Hey man, the arcade," I began. I was cut off as a man turned around quickly, knocking my hand off his shoulder. He quickly pulled a gun out of his jacket and pointed it at me. I fell back. "I have to finish my game," he told me sternly. He then went back to the game. I was on the floor, watching this guy, not knowing what to do. I was too scared to move, and all he did was stand there playing the game. He was pretty good at the game, as he played on for about half an hour on that one quarter. When he died, he cursed, and then turned and walked away from the game. He walked to the front door and tried to open the door. "Hey man," he called back to me, your door is locked." There was no malice, no anger, nothing in his voice. He said this like it was nothing more than a request. I slowly walked to the front of the arcade. I was scared. The whole time I expected him to come out from the front of the store and shoot me or something worse, but he was just standing there. He actually shot me a short smile and said, "Hey, your door is locked." I opened the door. He thanked me and told me he'd be back in the morning. He left and I locked the door. Of course I called the cops. They had no way of finding him, but they arrested him in the morning. He actually came back to play the game. I had security cameras, and his gun, which was stolen, was on him. I only saw him again in court. I don't know, the gun wasn't... the gun wasn't scary. I mean, it was, but it wasn't as scary as his demeanor. I mean, seriously, his eyes were empty. And when you played that game, he was unpleasant. But he just began acting nice when he wasn't playing that game. It was creepy, and I sold that. Number 3, the bully. Yeah, I was bullied when I was in school. Bullied pretty badly, actually. There was this guy named Alex who was just the worst person I had ever known. I don't know why he hated me, but he always wanted to fight me. And looking back, I learned that testosterone is a great equalizer, making boys into assholes, every one of them. But whatever it was, this guy Alex just had it in for me. And Alex wasn't just present at school either. He lived in the same neighborhood that I did. I didn't see him all the time, but occasionally he would show up at one of the parks and playgrounds, and he would normally chase me out. I tended to be very aware that he was around, and when he was, I could get away from him pretty quickly. He really was a brutal bully. I mean, he got into a lot of fights, and he beat up his opponents pretty badly too. I had never been in a fight with him because I tended to be around teachers all day. And one day I decided to go out to the arcade because I had a little bit of money. It wasn't something I was able to do often because money didn't come around as much. I got to the arcade and went over to the change machine to get some quarters. I went to go see what game I was wanting to play. However, I stopped when I noticed at the end of the aisle, Alex was playing a game with his friend. He hadn't seen me, and I quickly moved away. I found the game on the second floor, so I just hoped he wouldn't find me. That's all I was playing a game. I don't even remember what it was, but I felt something grab me, and my head was thrust forward into the glass of the video game. I went dark. I mean, it's the only time in my life I went dark. There was no time, no existence, nothing. I was just gone. Then the weirdest thing happened. I don't really believe in the supernatural, so I'm going to try and assume this was just my brain creating an image to calm me down. But I saw myself. I saw myself lying on the floor of the arcade. There were paramedics and they were trying to revive me. It was odd, and it only lasted for a few moments. After that, everything went dark again. Next thing I knew, I was in the hospital. I had died. For some reason, when Alex, and yeah, it was Alex, hit me from behind and knocked me into the video game, I didn't pass out. I went into shock. It was cardiogenic shock. An air bubble got in my bloodstream from my lungs right as Alex knocked me forward, and it caused the shock and my heart stopped. Fortunately, the paramedics made it in time. Alex was terrified. I mean, he thought that he had killed me, and that he'd be going to jail for life. I didn't mind the idea. but he apologized greatly, and he came to visit me in the hospital. He was charged, but my parents and I asked the court to be lenient on him. Why, you might ask? Because he changed. He didn't just pretend to change either. That boy was so scared that he had killed me that he completely turned over a new leaf. I mean, he really changed. He was nice to me for the rest of the time that I knew him. He even stood up for me once when another bully tried to hurt me. Alex was afraid. I was afraid because I saw myself out of my body and I thought I was dead. He was afraid because he thought he caused my heart to stop, although the doctor said it was just a big coincidence that the air got into my lungs at that time. But Alex wouldn't believe that. He was convinced he'd kill me. And it wasn't that he was scared of going to jail, really. We talked, and I told him how scared I was when I was dead. It was the worst thing ever, and he felt it too. He felt, for a few moments, what it felt like to kill someone. And he hated the feeling. I don't know what else to tell you in this story. If you've never had a similar experience, you probably can't know how I felt. But it was scary for both of us. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. I hope you like this video. I've been trying to find new topics for my channel, and let me know what you think about the thumbnail too. My sister, Evil Black Cat, did it for me, and she'll probably be doing them in the future too. Speaking of that, I have something to ask of everyone. My channel has been lagging lately in views, and I want to invigorate it somehow. One thing I'm going to do is a lot of work to get a lot more videos out. I will start doing occasional live streams again. I have done the occasional top 5 list. Should I add things like that? If I do, keep in mind, it will contain information not found over and over again on YouTube channels. For example, if I did a top 5 unsolved mysteries, I will not have Eliza Lamb in it, I promise. I will try to find things that have not been showcased everywhere. My other question is about debunking paranormal claims. Keep in mind, I don't watch a video and say, well, I want to debunk this before I watch it.